Nathan Cole was 37 years old the morning his attorney called to tell him that his wife had phoned his old number the night before and said everything. He had changed his number 14 weeks earlier, the same week his attorney Winston Graves had taken the old SIM card and placed it in a dedicated handset in his office. It was a precaution Winston had recommended, in the same tone he used to recommend everything: clear, economical, without elaboration. Nathan had agreed without asking for an explanation. He trusted Winston the way he trusted a good foundation, not because he inspected it daily, but because the engineering behind it was sound. Camille had called at 9:47 on a Thursday evening. Winston had answered. What Camille said in the next 6 minutes and 12 seconds, believing apparently that she had reached a line that led nowhere, cost her $68,000 in a hidden account she had told no court existed. The full 14-month timeline of her involvement with a man named Derek Hollis, and a settlement figure she had described on the call as already locked in. What she did not know was that Georgia was a one-party consent state. What she did not know was that Winston Graves had been recording from the second ring. What she did not know was that the man who answered her call had spent 22 years dismantling exactly the kind of case she believed she had already won. What happened next would cost Camille Cole far more than she had allowed herself to imagine. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Nathan's morning started before the light was fully up. Had started that way for years, since before there was a reason anyone else would have recognized. He was at the small table on the front porch of the apartment on Ponce de Leon Avenue by 5:30 most days, reviewing project drawings with his coffee going cold beside him, watching the magnolia tree in the front yard come into its early morning shape. He had been doing this, the early morning discipline, the drawings, the quiet before the world set its terms, since long before Camille, since before the consulting firm, since before any of it had resolved into the life it had become. His grandmother in Savannah had been the one to instill it. She had been up at 4:30 every morning of the life Nathan had witnessed, moving through her kitchen in the dark, not because the day demanded it, but because she believed in meeting the day before it had the chance to set its own terms. A quiet house tells you more truth than a loud one, she had told him once, sitting at her kitchen table in the gray pre-dawn light. Learn to listen in the quiet. She had been 76 that morning. She had been gone for 4 years. He heard her most days in that first hour before the world got loud. The Nathan Cole that Atlanta knew was a structural engineer at a well-regarded civil firm downtown. Reliable, methodical, the kind of professional clients requested specifically because he did not miss things. He drove a company-plated truck and wore a hard hat to more meetings than he wore a tie, and had never been the kind of person whose name appeared in the rooms where Atlanta's real money moved. Cole Structural Partners was a different matter. He had founded it 9 years ago, while still employed at the civil firm, through a holding company Winston had structured, and which carried a name that appeared nowhere in Nathan's public professional profile. It had started small, independent consulting contracts on evenings and weekends, projects that built their own reputation in the quiet margins of the market. By year 4, it had grown past the point of quietness. By year 7, it had 3 employees and a consistent project load. At year 9, it held 2 active commercial contracts, a leasehold interest in a jointly developed property in Midtown, an evaluation that Winston updated annually with a satisfaction he did not bother to conceal. Camille had known Nathan did independent consulting work. She had not asked what it was worth. He had not explained. He had met her at an industry gathering in Buckhead 8 years ago. She had been presenting on urban development financing, and she had been specific and confident. And at dinner afterward, She was the kind of person who listened as precisely as she spoke. They had talked until the restaurant closed. He had driven her home. For 4 years after that, she had been exactly that person, present, precise, building something alongside him with the same care he brought to any structure meant to last. Year 5 was where the drift began. He noticed it first in how often she mentioned a man named Derek Hollis, a commercial real estate developer she had met through a client, whose visible wealth was architecturally arranged, everything positioned for maximum impression. She mentioned Derek twice in a month. Then, 4 times across 2 months. Nathan had said nothing. He had noted it the way he noted a stress fracture, not yet structural, but the kind of thing that required observation before it required intervention. By year 7, the observation had become documentation. He filed for legal separation on a Monday in August. Camille had not been surprised, which told him everything he needed to know about how long she had been preparing. The house went to a property hold. Accounts were frozen. Attorneys had been exchanged. Winston had taken custody of Nathan's old number, placed it in a dedicated handset on his office credenza, and told Nathan that people who believed they were calling an empty line sometimes said useful things. He had believed Winston. Winston had not been wrong. He was on the front porch reviewing drainage specifications for the Midtown contract on a Friday morning when his phone buzzed with Winston's name on the screen. "You need to come in," Winston said. She called last night. Winston's conference room in Buckhead had the specific quality of a space designed to make difficult conversations feel manageable. Clean lines, good light, nothing present that didn't serve a purpose. He was 54, lean, precise, with the steady deliberateness of a man who had spent 2 decades turning careless words into legal consequences. He set the phone on the table between them and looked at Nathan the way a surgeon looks at a patient before delivering findings he has already prepared himself to present. "She called at 9:47 Thursday evening," Winston said. "I answered on the 3rd ring. I identified myself as Winston Graves, attorney at law." She was quiet for approximately 2 seconds, and then proceeded. "Proceeded," Nathan said, as though she had reached a neutral party. Winston pressed play. Nathan listened. His hands did not shake. Camille's voice on the recording had the quality of a person performing a private triumph for an audience she had constructed in her own mind, the tone of someone narrating a victory rather than living one. She said Nathan's name twice in the first minute. She said Derek's name once, the way you say someone's name when you've stopped being careful about it. She said the settlement figure, $112,000, with a satisfied emphasis of a number she had been holding in her mind for a long time. She said specifically that Nathan had no idea about the Peachtree account. She said the balance was $68,000, moved over the preceding 11 months. Then she had laughed. Then she said, "He never looked." Winston stopped the recording. Nathan sat very still for a long time. Then he moved with the same deliberate calm that defined all his important decisions. "Georgia," he said. "One-party consent," Winston said. "Fully admissible. I can have it transcribed and authenticated by end of week. Do that." Nathan opened the folder on the table. "I want to find the Peachtree account today." It took Franklin Okafor, Nathan's financial advisor, retained 3 months ago specifically for forensic documentation. 4 hours to locate the account. It was held under Camille's maiden name at a community bank in Decatur. Opened 11 months prior. The balance at the time of the recording matched exactly what she had said. The deposit source, 23 transfers, each between $2,000 and $4,000, drawn from the joint investment account Camille had been managing since year 3 of the marriage. 23 transfers over 11 months. The first had cleared 9 days after Camille's attorney submitted the initial financial disclosure, a disclosure in which the investment account had been listed at its current post-transfer balance, without reference to any recent withdrawal activity. She had been draining the account and understating it simultaneously. She had built her settlement framework on a number she had been actively falsifying. Nathan added the account documentation to the folder. He added the recording transcript. He added the withdrawal timeline cross-referenced against Camille's attorney's settlement submissions, which showed a pattern of proposed figures built on the understated balance. He sat with the full picture. She had called his old number believing she was celebrating in private. She had no idea she was deposing herself. He closed the folder. He picked up his phone. "I'm ready to file the response," he said. "I know," Winston said. "I've had it drafted since Friday morning." Winston laid out the full response strategy the following Tuesday with the systematic clarity Nathan had hired him for. The recording was the cornerstone. Camille's own voice establishing the undisclosed account, the manipulated balance, the 14-month affair timeline that directly contradicted the 4 months she had sworn to in her disclosure. In Georgia, Winston explained, an established adultery timeline could eliminate her spousal support eligibility. Her entire alimony request rested on a claim of mutual and recent deterioration. 14 months did not support that claim. Her own voice had said 14 months. Nathan drove from Winston's office to his Uncle Rollins' house in East Point. Roland Cole, 70 years old, retired Army logistics officer. The man who had raised Nathan alongside his grandmother after Nathan's father left, for reasons the family had never fully explained, and which Nathan had long since decided did not require explanation. Roland was in the garage when Nathan arrived, working on the 1969 Chevelle he had been restoring for 11 years, which was either an extremely long restoration or a project whose completion was not the point. He wiped his hands on a cloth and listened to everything on the porch without interrupting once. "Let me tell you what your grandmother told me," Rollins said, when Nathan finished. He set his coffee down on the railing. "She said the fastest way to lose your advantage is to use it before you fully understand it." He looked at his nephew. "You understand it all now?" "Yes," Nathan said. "Then you know what to do next," Rollins said. "And when?" Franklin also ran Derek Hollis's public financial profile. What emerged added a dimension Nathan had not anticipated. Hollis had co-signed a commercial property note with Camille 4 months prior, a transaction absent from Camille's financial disclosure. The property was a condominium development site in Decatur. The note had been secured in part by a down payment that Franklin traced to the same Peachtree account Camille had mentioned on the recording. Hollis had structured it as a personal investment. The funds that made it possible had come from the marital estate without Nathan's knowledge. Nathan reviewed Franklin's summary. He was quiet for a long time. "Put this on page 9, he said. "It's already there," Winston said. The response filing went in on a Thursday, accompanied by the audio recording, a certified transcript, the Peachtree account documentation, the transfer timeline, and the Hollis co-signed note. Camille's attorney called Winston's office 4 times between Thursday afternoon and Friday noon. Winston returned all 4 calls collectively on Friday at 2 o'clock in a conference call that lasted 11 minutes. That same weekend, Nathan attended a mutual friend's birthday dinner that both he and Camille had been invited to before the separation, and which neither had thought to withdraw from. He arrived at 7. Camille was at a table near the far end of the room with Derek Hollis, who wore the specific ease of a man who had not yet fully absorbed what had been filed. Nathan said hello to the host. He ate dinner. He talked to people he had not seen in months about architecture and the city and a new development corridor in the West Side. He did not look in Camille's direction more than twice. Both times she was watching him, and both times he looked at her with the expression of a man who has completed an inspection and found exactly what he expected. He did not change his expression. Preparation was not a moment. It was everything that came before the moment, accumulated quietly, until the moment arrived ready. The mediation had been requested by Camille's attorney, which Winston noted without comment was itself a signal. The session was scheduled for a Thursday morning in Winston's conference room. Camille arrived with James Pratt, who had the bearing of a man accustomed to favorable outcomes and the specific caution of someone who had read the response filing twice and was not certain he had fully absorbed it. Camille was dressed carefully and walked into the room with the practiced composure of a woman who had decided on her presentation. Nathan was already seated. Winston sat to his right. Roland, at Nathan's invitation, sat at the far end of the table in the quiet way Roland occupied most rooms, fully present, saying nothing, carrying the temperature of someone who had spent 30 years being the calmest person in difficult situations. Camille glanced at Roland when she came in. She returned her attention to the table without acknowledging him. James Pratt opened his portfolio. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss a revised framework. My client acknowledges the response filing raises matters requiring address. We believe there is a path to resolution that avoids protracted litigation. Winston placed 3 documents on the table. The first was the certified transcript of the Thursday recording, with timestamps, speaker identifications, and the relevant admissions marked clearly. The second was the Peachtree account documentation, the account statement, the deposit history, the transfer source analysis, the timeline mapped against the settlement figures Camille's attorney had submitted to the court. The third was the Cole Structural Partners full disclosure, valuation, project portfolio, holding company assets, the Midtown leasehold interest, the liquid reserve. $2.8 million, built over 9 years, beginning before the marriage. The recording establishes 3 things material to these proceedings, Winston said, in the voice he used when he was stating facts that were not going to be debated. First, the existence of an undisclosed marital asset, the Peachtree account, confirmed by your client on recording at $68,000, funded through 23 transfers from the joint investment account your client managed. Second, a settlement figure your client described as locked in, built on the investment account's deliberately understated balance. Third, the timeline of your client's involvement with Derek Hollis, 14 months by her own statement, which contradicts the 4-month timeline in her sworn disclosure. He set his pen down. The Cole Structural Partners disclosure is our response to the settlement framework your office submitted. The firm predates this marriage. Its valuation is $2.8 million. None of this appears in your client's disclosure, because your client did not know it existed. James Pratt was writing quickly. Camille was looking at the recording transcript with the focused attention of someone who was realizing, in a single unfolding moment, what they said, and precisely to whom they said it. Nathan. Her voice was controlled when she found it, aimed at something she still believed might be retrievable. You built all of that, Cole Structural, for 9 years and said nothing. You had full access to our household finances, Nathan said, in the same quiet register he used when something on a job site had gone wrong and needed to be corrected without anyone raising their voice. You managed our investment accounts for 5 years. You never asked what else existed. I answered what you asked. She leaned forward slightly. Whatever I said on that call, I was venting. I was frustrated. Nothing on that recording was inaccurate. Roland spoke from the end of the table. Not loudly, not sharply, with the complete patience of a man who had listened without interruption and was now simply placing the final item in an already assembled structure. "Camille," Rollins said, "that man sat at your table for 8 years. He fixed the things in that house with his own hands. He never asked you to know what he was worth, because he was never looking for your valuation of him. You made that mistake on your own." He looked at her without unkindness, without theater. "The recording is what it is. The account is what it is. Read what's in front of you." Camille looked at Roland. She looked at the documents. She looked at Nathan. James Pratt asked for a recess. Nathan said, of course. He poured water and sat with Roland while the attorneys stepped into the hallway. Roland looked out at the Atlanta skyline with the expression of a man who had seen many versions of this moment and found none of them surprising. "She thought she knew the whole picture," Roland said. "Most people do," Nathan said. The attorneys returned after 15 minutes. James Pratt spoke in the language of revised terms. Winston responded in the language of the documented record. The session ran another 90 minutes. By its conclusion, a preliminary settlement had been reached on parameters that Winston would later describe, without editorial comment, as consistent with a full and accurate accounting of the marital estate. Nathan stood and buttoned his jacket. He looked at Camille one final time. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. With the clean-eyed assessment of a man who has completed a structural review and confirmed the load calculations were correct. "You called the wrong number," he said. "I hope the conversation was still useful to you somehow." He walked out of the conference room. He rode the elevator to the lobby. He stepped into the Atlanta Morning and walked to his truck and drove to the Midtown site, where the foundation work was 4 days ahead of schedule and the crew was waiting on a sign-off for the next phase. He reviewed the drawings. He gave the sign-off. He went to work. He did not look back. 10 months passed like a well-run project, not without complication, but on schedule, arriving at something that looked like what it was always supposed to be. Nathan was on the front porch of the apartment on Ponce de Leon on a Sunday morning in October, with his coffee and the magnolia tree back in its season, and a set of drawings for the Midtown project's final phase in the early light. He had purchased the apartment outright in March, not as a transitional address but as the place, the one that was his, with walls he had started repainting on weekends and a kitchen he was planning to retile when the project's schedule opened up. Cole Structural Partners had signed a third contract in June. Franklin had revised the valuation upward. The divorce had finalized in August on terms Winston described, without additional commentary, as reflective of the complete and accurate record. Camille had received what the law determined she was entitled to under a fully disclosed estate, which was a different outcome from the one she had been building toward when she made the call. Derek Hollis had dissolved the co-signed Decatur note in March. His Buckhead condo had been listed shortly after. Nathan had heard this through the professional network that tracked these things without effort, mentioned in passing, already receding. Camille was in project coordination at a smaller development firm in Alpharetta. He had heard this through a mutual colleague, the way you hear things that are no longer significant. A woman named Ava had been introduced to Nathan by Rollins' daughter at a September dinner, a civil engineer relocated from Houston 2 years prior, who had looked at the Midtown site drawings on Nathan's phone and asked 3 questions about the soil remediation approach. Each one sharper than the last. They had talked for 2 hours about foundations and drainage and the particular challenges of building in the Atlanta basin. She paid for coffee when they met the following week and said it was nothing. He had believed her. On that Sunday morning in October, Nathan set his drawings down and drank his coffee and looked at the magnolia tree coming back into itself in the season it was made for. His grandmother's voice arrived in the quiet the way it always did, clear and unhurried, as though the distance between Savannah and Atlanta was nothing at all. A quiet house tells you more truth than a loud one. He had learned to listen in the quiet. The quiet had given him everything. She had called the wrong number, and the right man had answered, and what followed had been as inevitable as a foundation that was always going to hold. He was solvent. He was building. He was unbothered. Some men wait for the right moment. Nathan had waited. The moment had come to him. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.